You woke to the strange taste of dry sand on your tongue, the sun's heat already seeping through the thin gaps of the paltry straw roof above. Your eyes stung under the pale light, barely filtering into the small, crooked hut. Around you, the sharp scent of burning herbs clung to the air, weaving with the damp musk of ancient, soaked mud that formed the walls. You rose slowly from the straw-stuffed mattress, your muscles stiff from a restless night, knowing the time was near. Soon you would be engulfed in strange rites where potions mixed with murmured invocations would decide if your soul would walk free or be claimed by Egypt's hidden, deadly magic. Outside, the morning stirred reluctantly. The faint blue-gray shimmer of dawn spread like a cloak over the arid land, dust motes drifting lazily in the quiet air. The village lay wrapped beneath a haze, silent except for the distant, almost forgotten hum of the desert wind. It brushed cold against your bare skin, carrying whispers of forgotten curses and lost remedies. Your fingers trembled as you gathered the sticky, coarse roots, ground with care into a paste. The texture clung to your hands, uneven and gritty, recalling the rough weave of your only threadbare cloak, a fragile armor against the wilderness encroaching beyond the village bounds. The sound of the bubbling cauldron filled the still room, its low murmur marking time like a slow heartbeat in the thick silence. Each slow breath you took tasted faintly of smoke and grit, grounding you in this fragile existence between worlds. If today the sudden death of a phone battery feels like a tragedy, you fought bitterly. Imagine the quiet dread centuries ago when your last scrap of firewood turned to cold ash under relentless sun. Despite the heavy weight of the day ahead, there was a faint shimmer of warmth when you stepped outside. Around a small fire, your fellow villagers huddled close, sharing the scant heat and whispered prayers. The flickering flames painted their lined faces in soft light, brief hope clinging like embers in the chill dawn. But the comfort was fragile, as fleeting as your own uncertain grip on life and death in this place. As you prepared to enter the chamber where the rituals held you captive, a sudden hush fell over the village. The usual barking of dogs ceased abruptly, swallowed by a thick tension that pulsed through the air. Eyes exchanged unspoken warnings. You felt the weight of unseen eyes, shadows flickering just beyond your field of vision. The ancient secrets you sought to master seemed to stir, their cruel power inching nearer, promising neither mercy nor escape. Before Morpheus claims you, the button has vanished, and I don't want you to miss the next bedtime tales. While you're at it, leave a like soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being a part of it. You stepped lightly across the worn threshold of the crooked hut, your bare feet pressing against the uneven packed earth. Cool now, after the receding dawn, the faint crunch of dry mud beneath your toes was a quiet reminder of the fragile ground you relied upon. Stubborn, cracked, and yet strangely persistent. The fire's smoky aroma clung to your skin as the ember glow faded behind you, leaving only the pale blue light settling across the village like a cautious breath held too long. Your heart beat slow, measured, as though mirroring the steady drip of sweat from your temple, tracing down the side of your face before falling silently onto the dry dust. Outside, the village felt suspended in time, a fragile pause between night's long shadows and the unrelenting sun climbing higher. The frail walls of mud and straw held memories of forgotten hardship, whispered secrets caught in the brittle creases of each crack. You drew your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the coarse thread scrape against your skin. A faint tickle beneath your trembling fingers. The wind stirred then, lifting loose strands of hair, threading the cool air with the scent of scorched leaves and distant sand, draped across the earth like an invisible shroud. You moved toward the small gathering near the fire, where faces shadowed beneath heavy brows traded murmurs alive with tension. The smoke spiraled upward in lazy coils, catching the soft light and glowing amber against the fading night, each flicker painting fleeting patterns on the villagers' hardened expressions. Your eyes traced the worn hands rolling herbs, their movements slow and deliberate, as if the act itself was a fragile defense against the weight pressing on all of you. The air was thick with unspoken fear, a waiting carved so deep it seemed to pulse beneath your skin. You reached out and clasped a root in your palm, its rough surface gritty, uneven, much like the world you inhabited. The roots smelled damp and earthy, a faint bitterness that mingled unexpectedly with the smoke. You could almost feel the weight of ancient rites cradled in each piece, a silent pact between survival and surrender. Despite the rising sun, the morning air remained cool against your skin, the desert's harsh embrace softened only by the fragile cloak of mist still lingering at the horizon. You took a slow breath, letting the sense of dry earth and burning herbs settle into you, grounding you in this moment thick with expectation. Your fingers moved automatically, crushing the roots with deliberate care, the paste oozing sluggishly between your nails. It was a meticulous rhythm, slow and controlled, each motion a tether to the fragile hope of the day ahead. From the corner of your eye, the village shifted as a sudden hush fell over the gathering. The usual chorus of dogs and murmurs retreated beneath a heavy silence that pressed in with palpable weight. You felt, rather than saw, the subtle tightening of gazes, the tentative movements exchanged in shadows, the collective breath held in a fragile chorus of anticipation. The fire's crackle stuttered almost imperceptibly, as if sensing the tension threading through the air. And in that moment, even the light seemed to dim. You moved closer to the chamber, where silence reigned like a lingering fog. The heavy door stood slightly ajar, guarded by nothing but the weight of ancient walls and the unseen eyes watching from beyond. Your footsteps echoed faintly, slow, deliberate, as your breath slowed to a restrained pace, each inhale tasting faintly of smoke and dust. The faint pulse of your heart dragged time out, each beat stretching into a measured eternity. You ran your hand along the rough wooden lintel, feeling the splintered grain beneath trembling fingers. The subtle tremor of something ancient etched in every fiber. Within the chamber, the air was dense and thick, soaked with memories. The scent of burnt sage and dried herbs lingered in the stagnant atmosphere, hanging heavy as the thin rays of morning light filtered through narrow slits high on the mud walls. The flickering shadows cast strange shapes, half-remembered figures frozen in motion, hovering between present and past, as if the very stone and mud breathed with hidden life. Every breath you drew was weightier here, each moment folded tightly between anticipation and dread. You settled onto the cold, uneven floor, feeling the rocky weave beneath your fingertips, rough like the village itself, both fragile and stubborn. Your eyes traced the shards of light cutting through the dimness, imagining the whispered incantations threading through the air like invisible webs. The slow rhythm of chanting began outside your hearing, distant yet insistent, weaving in low waves that pressed against your skin, curling with the scent of smoke and ancient dust. Each inhale pulled the shadows closer, dancing just beyond comprehension, hinting at forces old as the earth itself. Time moved at the pace of a hesitant pulse, slow, heavy, deliberate. You felt the rough paste on your hands, the gritty weight of roots and earth seeping into your skin. Your mortality, every small motion felt magnified, slow and excruciating in its deliberate care. You checked the seals one more time, the cool metal gleaming faintly, the subtle creak of leather straps whispering beneath your fingers. The silence held its breath with you, the calm before a shift you could neither predict nor fully sense. Beyond the chamber's threshold, soft murmurs wove with the rising sun, prayers time-worn and fragile. The village held its secret breath, every shadow weighing heavy upon the dust-cracked walls. The faintest rustle caught your ear, like the skitter of wings or the soft slide of fabric against skin. But when you turned, only emptiness waited. You could feel eyes watching, unseen and unmoving, pressing closer as the ancient rites approached their reckoning. As the chanting swelled just beyond the mud walls, your pulse tightened. Then, from the corner of your vision, a slow movement, a shadow detached itself from the dimmed edges of the room, It flickered like a breath caught between worlds, slower than thought, almost a hesitation. You could not tell if it was flesh or shadow, friend or something far older and colder. Your breath caught, the room tilting inward as the presence drifted closer. Not loud, not sudden, but an inexorable pull at the edge of your senses. And then the shadow vanished, leaving behind only a whisper of cold regret and a single love. Faint pulse, as if the earth itself remembered something you were only beginning to glimpse. You held your breath as the shadow slipped back into the dim folds of the room, as if swallowed whole by the swelling haze of incense and dust. Your heart ticked unevenly beneath your ribs, slow and deliberate, every beat stretching into a fragile eternity. The faint, earthy scent of crushed roots on your skin mingled with the lingering smoke, grounding you to the shifting currents of this place, a tenuous space between memory and the unknown. The chanting outside wove around the chamber's walls like a long whispering thread, steady yet fragile, threading itself through the spaces between your thoughts. You felt the vibrations as they pressed lightly against your skin, the rising and falling cadence like the gentle sway of reeds in a quiet marsh. Your fingers tightened instinctively around the gritty paste, the coarse texture sticking to your trembling palms, as if the roots themselves held silent power, a tether both to this life and what might come beyond. Slowly, painfully, you rose to your feet, muscles stiff with the weight of the morning stillness. The cold floor whispered against your bare skin, rough and unyielding, a reminder that the earth beneath was unforgiving and ancient. You stepped toward the narrow slit of light where dawn pooled quietly like water, the pale fingers stretching lazily across the cracked mud walls. The air here was thick, heavy with the promise of unseen eyes, waiting and watching beyond the veil of waking life. Each step forward was a cautious negotiation, a soft scrape of skin against rough stone, a careful avoidance of the uneven stones scattered like forgotten bones beneath your feet. The slow, deliberate rhythm of your passage mixed with the distant hum of the villagers' chants, a haunting chorus that ebbed and flowed with the breath of the desert beyond. You could almost feel the heat rising from the sunlit horizon, dimmed for now by the lingering haze, as if the day itself hesitated to break fully into being. Your gaze flicked toward the threshold behind you, the hut's crooked frame silhouetted against the thinning mist. Pale dust motes drifted like fragile sparks in the filtered morning light, caught between time and place. You breathed in again, the scent of scorched earth and burnt herbs filling your lungs, weaving through the slow pulse of your heart. The moment felt suspended, fragile as a spider's web shimmering with dew, waiting for some sudden rupture. Yet even as you stepped onward, a sharp sensation bubbled beneath the surface, a cold tremor brushing the nape of your neck. Like the silent glide of a shadow's breath, your skin prickled under the soft weight of unseen presence, something ancient and slow-moving, halfway between fear and fascination. You dared not turn, knowing the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for you to make the next move. Farther into the chamber, quietened now, except for the faint murmur of voices and the occasional crackle from the dying fire outside. You approached a small altar grimed with age and ritual. The surface was rough, pocked by time, adorned only by scattered herbs and the faint dust of offerings long past. You knelt slowly, feeling the scrape of sand and stone against your knees, and placed the sticky paste carefully at its center. The coarse smell rose anew, mixing with the salt of sweat wringing your skin. Your fingers lingered for a moment on the edge of the altar, tracing a pattern almost forgotten. Ancient symbols worn by countless hands, faint like whispers carved in stone. The weight of those unseen histories felt heavy in your palm, yet strangely comforting amid the thin threads of dread curling through your veins. The flames outside flickered once more, casting shadows that swayed like slow dancers across the walls, as if the very air was alive with things just beyond grasp. A distant bell tolled somewhere deep in the village, a hollow, echoing sound that drifted through the gathering dawn, folding softly around the chanting. You felt it inside you, a small wave of warmth, fragile and fleeting, like the timid sun breaking through a veil of morning mist. For a heartbeat, the tension eased, the weight of ancient rites pressing a little lighter on your shoulders. But the calm was brittle, and the silence soon grew taut again, stretched thin by the gathering storm of expectation. The air thickened, heavy with the musky scent of wet earth and dry leaves. The shadows at the edges of the room seemed to pulse, ebbing in and out like slow waves no longer caught in the flow of time. Every breath became an act of willing calm, stretching seconds into moments, moments into an endless stillness where fear and hope hovered delicately entwined. Then abruptly, the chamber door, rough wood shifting under some unseen pressure. Your breath caught, fingers still upon the altar, as the distant chanting hiccuped and faltered. A fragile falter that rippled through the silence like a stone dropped in dark water. The faint glimmer of movement returned at the edge of your vision, slower this time, deliberate, a shadow uncoiling itself with measured patience. Your pulse quickened, tightening into a knot of awareness that prickled down your spine. The space seemed to contract, the walls closing in like the slow tightening of a trap. Yet the presence did not advance. It lingered at the periphery, a slow, silent sentinel, watching, waiting to test the fragile thread of your courage. And then, in the very moment your heart seemed to still, the figure stepped forward, not rushing, but with the inevitable. The thick air faint as a breath barely given, a name you knew yet did not understand, shimmering like a half-remembered dream. Your world tipped ever so slightly, caught between the pull of revelation and the edge of oblivion, as the shadows swallowed the whispered sound, leaving you suspended once more between the dawn's soft light and the dark unknown that waited patiently to claim your soul. You held your breath as the shadow slipped back into the dim folds of the room, as if swallowed whole by the swelling haze of incense and dust. Your heart ticked unevenly beneath your ribs, slow and deliberate, every beat stretching into a fragile eternity. The faint, earthy scent of crushed roots on your skin mingled with the lingering smoke, grounding you to the shifting currents of this place, a tenuous space between memory and the unknown. The chanting outside wove around the chamber's walls like a long whispering thread, steady yet fragile, threading itself through the spaces between your thoughts. You felt the vibrations as they pressed lightly against your skin, the rising and falling cadence like the gentle sway of reeds in a quiet marsh. Your fingers tightened instinctively around the gritty paste, the coarse texture sticking to your trembling palms, as if the roots themselves held silent power, a tether both to this life and what might come beyond. Slowly, painfully, you rose to your feet, muscles stiff with the weight of the morning stillness. The cold floor whispered against your bare skin, rough and unyielding, a reminder that the earth beneath was unforgiving and ancient. You stepped toward the narrow slit of light where dawn pooled quietly like water, the pale fingers stretching lazily across the cracked mud walls. The air here was thick, of unseen eyes, waiting and watching beyond the veil of waking life. Each step forward was a cautious negotiation, a soft scrape of skin against rough stone, a careful avoidance of the uneven stones scattered like forgotten bones beneath your feet. The slow, deliberate rhythm of your passage mixed with the distant hum of the villagers' chants, a haunting chorus that ebbed and flowed with the breath of the desert beyond. You could almost feel the heat rising from the sunlit horizon, dimmed for now by the lingering haze, as if the day itself hesitated to break fully into being. Your gaze flicked toward the threshold behind you, the hut's crooked frame silhouetted against the thinning mist. Pale dust motes drifted like fragile sparks in the filtered morning light, caught between time and place. You breathed in again, the scent of scorched earth and burnt herbs filling your lungs, weaving through the slow pulse of your heart. The moment felt suspended, fragile as a spider's web shimmering with dew, waiting for some sudden rupture. Yet even as you stepped onward, a sharp sensation bubbled beneath the surface, a cold tremor brushing the nape of your neck, like the silent glide of a shadow's breath. Your skin prickled under the soft weight of unseen presence, something ancient and slow-moving, halfway between fear and fascination. You dared not turn, knowing the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for you to make the next move. Farther into the chamber, quietened now except for the faint murmur of voices and the occasional crackle from the dying fire outside, you approached the small altar grimed with age and ritual. The surface was rough, pocked by time, adorned only by scattered herbs and the faint dust of offerings long past. You knelt slowly, feeling the scrape of sand and stone against your knees, and placed the sticky paste carefully at its center. The coarse smell rose anew, mixing with the salt of sweat wringing your skin. Your fingers lingered for a moment on the edge of the altar, tracing a pattern almost forgotten. Ancient symbols worn by countless hands, faint like whispers carved in stone. The weight of those unseen histories felt heavy in your palm, yet strangely comforting amid the thin threads of dread curling through your veins. The flames outside flickered once more, casting shadows that swayed like slow dancers across the walls, as if the very air was alive with things just beyond grasp. A distant bell tolled somewhere deep in the village, a hollow, echoing sound that drifted through the gathering dawn, folding softly around the chanting. You felt it inside you, a small wave of warmth, fragile and fleeting, like the timid sun breaking through a veil of morning mist. For a heartbeat, the tension eased, the weight of ancient rites pressing a little lighter on your shoulders. But the calm was brittle, and the silence soon grew taut again, stretched thin by the gathering storm of expectation. The air thickened, heavy with the musky scent of wet earth and dry leaves. The shadows at the edges of the room seemed to pulse, ebbing in and out like slow waves no longer caught in the flow of time. Every breath became an act of willing calm, stretching seconds into moments, moments into an endless stillness where fear and hope hovered delicately entwined. Then, abruptly, the chamber door groaned, the rough wood shifting under some unseen pressure. Your breath caught, fingers still upon the altar, as the distant chanting hiccuped and faltered, a fragile falter that rippled through the silence like a stone dropped in dark water. The faint glimmer of movement returned at the edge of your vision. Slower this time, deliberate, a shadow uncoiling itself with measured patience. Your pulse quickened, tightening into a knot of awareness that prickled down your spine. The space seemed to contract, the walls closing in like the slow tightening of a trap. Yet the presence did not advance. It lingered at the periphery, a slow, silent sentinel, watching, waiting to test the fragile thread of your courage. And then, in the very moment your heart seemed to still, the figure stepped forward, not rushing, but with the inevitability of the tide, slow and inexorable. The single word it whispered hung in the thick air, faint as a breath barely given. A name you knew, yet did not understand, shimmering like a half-remembered dream of revelation and the edge of oblivion, as the shadows swallowed the whispered sound, leaving you suspended once more between the dawn's soft light and the dark unknown that waited patiently to claim your soul. You blinked slowly, the cool morning light grazing your eyelids, and the room stilled. The faint pulse of the whispered name throbbed in your mind, a quiet echo mingling with the fading smoke and dust. Your fingers slackened around the altar's edge, the rough wood grounding you once again to the earth beneath. A soft breeze stirred the narrow slits high on the mud walls, carrying with it the scent of burnt sage and dry earth. It was a fragile breath, as if the desert world itself exhaled gently, licking the shadows like flickering candlelight. But beneath that warmth, beneath the steady hum of the fading chants, you felt the stirrings of something waiting, patient, ancient, and relentless. You hesitated, the weight of the moment folding you inward, the fragile balance of hope and dread tipping. Outside, the village lay shaded beneath the growing sun, still wrapped in a haze of quiet tension. Somewhere, a distant cry, part lament, part warning, flickered on the hollow wind, swift and fragile as the closing dark. The shadow's name lingered on your tongue, a secret pressed close to your soul. And as the morning stretched forward, you knew that whatever was coming would not wait long, nor would it forgive the forgotten. You stepped back from the altar, the rough paste drying faintly on your palms, and the scent of burnt herbs hung heavy. You turned slowly toward the chamber's threshold, heart still thrumming with the echo of whispered shadows. Outside, the heat whispered promises of a sun that could scorch truth from bone, and in that breath, the slow pulse of the earth beneath. You whispered a warning you could not yet hear, but would be impossible to ignore. The wind shifted, carrying a sound from the far edges of the desert, soft, unfamiliar, and impossible to place. Your breath ceased as the silence bent, and in its folding, the space between moments quivered with a portent you could neither name nor refuse. You stepped back from the altar, the rough paste drying to a faint crust on your calloused palms. The scent of burnt herbs lingered like a stubborn shadow, clinging to the folds of your cloak and the nape of your neck. The chamber's stale air pressed closer, thick with the weight of anticipation. Yet beneath it all, a fragile stillness breathed through the walls. You felt the slow, steady beat of your heart, echoing softly against the hollow spaces of your chest, as the distant bell tolled again, low, resonant, folding the morning deeper into itself. Your bare feet shifted carefully against the cracked mud floor. Each grain of dust, each tiny ridge and pit, grounded you in this moment, stretched thin between worlds. Outside, the chants had faded to murmurs, the voices blending with the dry desert wind that slipped through narrow slits high on the walls. You caught the faint scratch of loose straw settling atop the roof. a tender sound like sighs from the earth itself. Drawing your cloak tighter, you moved toward the chamber's threshold. The heavy door, its wood darkened by age and incense, creaked softly as you pushed it open further. The morning light spilled in colder now, the sun growing more insistent beyond the weak veil of haze. The village lay still, wrapped in an uneasy quiet that held its breath with you. You sensed the fragile rhythms of life outside, footsteps muffled by sand, whispered prayers fading between the cracked walls, the soft scrape of leather against earth. You stepped out, the warmth of the sun pressing gently against your skin, a subtle promise of endurance amid the endless desert expanse. The air felt dry, yet carried the sharp bite of something unseen, like the brush of a wing or the flicker of a shadow crossing your periphery. Your fingers brushed the coarse fabric of your cloak, the threadbare texture rough against trembling skin. The burning smoke from the fires hung faintly on the breeze, mingling with the scent of dry earth and burnt leaves, an ancient perfume of survival. Around the fire pit, villagers stood in muted clusters, their eyes heavy and wary beneath furrowed brows. Faces turned when you emerged, the flickering flamelight catching pale glints of wariness and quiet resolve. They exchanged no words, but their eyes spoke a language older than memory, each gaze stitching together threads of hope and fear. Some clutched talismans, others kept their hands folded tight, as if willing the fragile morning to hold steady. You moved slowly through the small crowd, each step careful not to disturb the brittle stillness. The sound of your breath rose and fell in time with the distant chanting, now a fragile pulse barely rising above the desert wind's soft moan. Somewhere nearby, a dog stirred, then fell silent again, as if pulled under a deeper calm. Your chest tightened at the absence of familiar noises, as though the very village held its secrets tight in trembling hands. You found yourself at the edge of the fire's glow, the warmth a thin line against the cool morning shadow. You knelt beside the rough stones circling the flames, feeling the gentle heat licking your skin, the scent of smoke folding slowly into the dry air. A slow ember drifted upward, a flicker of light dissolving softly into the pale sky. You closed your eyes for a long moment, letting the warmth seep past your senses, grounding you against the cold edges of doubt weaving through your thoughts. When you opened your eyes, the horizon had bled into deeper golds and burnt ochres, the sun stretching its fingers across the endless sands, reluctant yet inevitable. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a faint rustle from the dunes, the quick shuffle of something brushing against dry stone. You remained still, your gaze tethered to the shifting edge where desert met sky. The murmur of voices surged again, a chorus rising thin and fragile, like reeds bending beneath rain. It threaded through the hushed silence, weaving patterns just beyond your hearing. An unseen weight pressed against your spine, soft but insistent, drawing you back toward the shadows, flitting between sunspot and shade. Your breath slowed, drawing in the Sharp scent of burnt sage, tangled with the dry musk of earth and root. The paste on your hands, tight and crumbly now, its raw grit a strange comfort, a tether to this fractured moment, balanced desperately between dawn and day. Beneath the cloak's scratch, your skin prickled, a cold seeping through your pores, silent yet pervasive, as though some watchful presence lingered just beyond reach. Without warning, the quiet torn by a faint, distant cry, a fragment of sound carried swift across the open air, a wave that trembled briefly before folding back into silence. Your pulse caught in your throat, heartbeat stretching slow and taut, ready to unravel with the weight of unspoken answers. The villagers shifted beside you, a silent undercurrent of shared tension, threading through the gathering like a breath held too long. The sun climbed higher, shedding light on cracked earth and weary faces to ease the chill curling around your thoughts. The shadows clinging to the far edges of the village deepened, reaching like slow fingers toward corners and crevices where secrets thrived. The whisper of the shadow's name still pulsed quietly at the back of your mind, a murmur tangled in smoke and memory, elusive and insistent. As your gaze swept across the distant dunes, stretched wide beneath the blistering sky, something, an edge of movement, faint and deliberate, stirred in the heat's mirage. You blinked, the light wavering like a breath held between two worlds. It was no sudden flicker, no rush of wind, but a slow unfolding, patient and inexorable. The weight of the moment twisted inside you, a quiet reckoning poised on the knife's edge between dread and revelation. The horizon stretched endless, the desert's voice low and deep beneath the rising light, as if the earth itself was waiting for what you could barely begin to understand. And then, just as your breath curled fragile on the dry air, the whisper returned, soft yet undeniable, a faint calling from the shifting sands, a sound that seemed to draw everything taut, pulling you into the space between light and shadow. It was a name whispered by the wind, carried on the breath of the desert itself. You stepped from the chamber into the fragile calm of the morning. The village stretched quiet before you like a fragile breath held too long. The coarse paste on your palms had hardened slightly, its gritty texture a reminder both of your mortal hands and the slow rhythm of tasks that tethered you to this place. The sun was now higher, soft, pale gold spilling over cracked rooftops and barren soil. But the heat had not yet gathered its strength. It was a moment caught between the safety of dawn and the threat of relentless. Noon, suspended delicately in the arid air. As you moved forward through the narrow paths between huts, your bare feet raised faint dust clouds that drifted slowly in the stillness. The scent of burnt sage swirled faintly, mingling with dry earth and the subtle salt of sweat lingering on your skin. Around you, the villagers remained muted, faces drawn tight with quiet anticipation. Their eyes, shadowed beneath heavy lids, flickered briefly toward you before retreating, an unspoken acknowledgement in the silence that hung thick as desert haze. You thought of the shadow that had whispered your name, a fragile thread weaving through the morning fog inside your mind. The sound was both alien and intimate, a breath carried on the wind that seemed to stretch time itself. You dared not chase it, but you could not release its echo either. It clung, the remnants of the fire burned low, tiny embers smoldering in a ring of cracked stones that bore the marks of many seasons. You knelt softly beside it, feeling the heat retreat beneath your skin, warm fingers folding into the chill that rode the breeze. A faint murmur wove through the air, the distant hum of chanting, growing and fading, never quite resolving, a fragile pulse threading between shadow and light. Your thoughts traced the subtle movements of the village, the low rustle of loose straw on rooftops, the soft shuffle of feet tracing sacred patterns. A dog stirred somewhere in the distance, but chose silence over bark, its breath shallow and hesitant. The wind shifted, brushing against exposed skin with a teasing chill, as if the desert itself was testing your resolve. You rose slowly, muscles aching with the stiffness of endless mornings like this one, stretched thin by ritual and waiting. The coarse fabric of your cloak rasped quietly as you pulled it tighter, the rough weave drawing a scratch against your neck where skin had grown raw. You followed the path toward a low rise where the earth fell away in fragile terraces, the cracked dust fielding dry grasses that trembled like dying flames in the gentle breeze. Each step was a conversation with the ground beneath, faint grains slipping beneath your toes, stubborn as the memories engraved in these lands. The horizon blurred into a wavering band of heat and light, distant dunes shifting slowly beneath the sky's indifferent gaze. Your breath slowed, measured and deliberate, as awareness prickled over your skin like the soft scrape of sand against old leather. A distant bell tolled again, low and hollow, the sound hanging between wind and silence. A heavy weight of unseen eyes seemed to lift slightly, as if the earth exhaled softly, and the surface tension of dread eased around you. But beneath that fragile calm, a taut thread pulled at your senses, thin as a spider's silk. Your gaze caught a flicker, a movement too slow to be called sudden, in the shifting sand beyond the rise. You blinked, but the image lingered, a shadow folding over itself, waiting on the edge of sight. It was not a flicker of heat or a trick of the light, but something steadier, heavier, like the breath of the desert held beneath the sun's slow advance. The name whispered in the dark chambers, echoed faintly inside you again, a lost syllable curling upon your tongue. You did not, could not speak it aloud, yet it shaped the air around you with a quiet force, threading the light and shadow tighter into a web you could neither unravel nor ignore. The village stirred with the slow rhythm of ritual, footsteps, soft prayers, the scraping of rough hands on worn stone. But your thoughts lay far beyond, caught in the slow pulling of something ancient and patient just beyond reach. The sun climbed steadily, heat thickening the air until the faint haze wavered and shifted. The desert, breathing slow and deliberate, indifferent to mortal fear. You paused at the crest of the rise, the earth falling away into jagged lines of cracked clay and scattered stones. The horizon stretched endless and unforgiving beneath the pale blue sky. But your eyes searched for the shadow again, the sign, the omen, the promise hidden in patient stillness. A sudden, step by measured step, the desert held its secrets close, waiting. And then, from the shimmering heat, a figure took form, slow, deliberate, emerging from the wavering edge of vision like a ghost woven of dust and sun. Not yet fully seen, yet impossible to deny, it moved closer with quiet inevitability. Your skin tingled as the air tightened around you, the heavy silence pressing in like a tide, folding over ancient bones. Breath caught, heart slowed to a muted drum beneath the weight of endless desert sky. The whispered name hovered between you still, waiting. The desert held its breath with you. You stood rooted at the edge of the rising sun, the cracked earth stretching before you with silent, unyielding patience. The desert's breath was steady now, a quiet pulse accompanying the slow swell, neither asleep nor fully awake, while shadows retreated into the sun's reluctant advance. Your cloak hung heavy at your shoulders, the rough threads prickling along your neck, where skin was still tender from restless nights and colder dawns. The air tasted dry, sharp with the lingering scent of burnt sage and cracked mud beneath your bare feet. With each step forward, the ground whispered secrets, dust lifting gently to swirl with the fragile breath of wind and settling softly like a slow exhale pressed into the morning light. You felt the weight of footsteps that were not your own, the faintest shimmer at the edge of your vision, hesitant but persistent. Somewhere, just beyond the visible horizon, a shadow folded into itself, patient and slow-moving, its presence barely more than a sigh against the vast silence. Your fingers grazed the coarse fabric of your cloak as you moved toward a narrow path, cutting through brittle grasses. The rough stalks scratched against your skin and whispered dry secrets, trembling in the breath of an unseen wind. The village's muted murmurs drifted faintly behind you, prayers and cautious hopes woven tightly with the scent of smoldering roots and earth warmed by days long past. You breathed deeply, drawing in the textured tapestry of scents and warmth, as if to anchor the unease curling quietly within your chest. The sun climbed, its pale fingers reaching across the broken rooftops and cracked clay walls in languid strokes. Light played against your shadow, stretching long and fragmented before you, folding and unfolding like the slow rhythm of your thoughts. You hesitated when the path curled away toward a low ridge, where jagged stones lay scattered like ancient bones, and the air shimmered with heat and whispered possibility. A soft rustle stirred in the dry leaves at your feet, an almost imperceptible pulse that quickened your breath and tightened the slow rhythm of your heart. Despite the sun's fragile warmth, a cool tremor stirred at the nape of your neck, the unmistakable brush of something unseen. You dared not turn, but your skin prickled with the weight of eyes you could not find, lingering just beyond the curve of your vision. The desert seemed to hold its breath along with you, the endlessly shifting sands, waiting. Quiet and inevitable, you stepped carefully, the rough earth grinding softly underfoot, stray grains slipping between your toes like volatile sparks of time. Dust lifted in small swirls as the breeze whispered through the grasses, dragging a faint echo of distant voices tied to forgotten rituals and lost prayers. The past hovered close, a dense, palpable presence that pressed softly against your ribcage. You could almost see the outlines of those who came before. There, forms folded into the very soil, their breath woven with the endless wind. Ahead, the ridge promised a view that stretched endlessly, where sky met sand and the shimmering mirage blurred the edges of reality with slow, wavering grace. You climbed the stones with deliberate patience, each movement measured and pulled taut with quiet focus. The roughness bit gently at your skin, grounding you, reminding you of the fragile hold you kept on this existence. Balanced precariously between light and shadow. At the summit, you paused. The world spread out beneath you like an ancient tapestry, loosened at its edges. The horizon tore open to reveal dunes rolling endlessly beneath the sun's thick gaze, heat rising in lazy pillars that blurred the air and softened the sharp lines of the earth. A sudden gust swept past, carrying the dry scent of sand and distant fire. You shivered as the wind tanged cloak, pulling loose strands of hair across your face. The sun's light was steady but fragile here, as though the day itself had not yet made up its mind to break fully. In that breath, the whisper came again, soft, insistent, a name that hovered just beneath the surface of sound, delicate and impossible to grasp. You caught the syllable like a fragment of memory breathed long ago. A secret slipped between the sands. Your lips parted slightly, but no sound followed. The voice was the wind, the earth, the shadow all at once, fragile as the dust swirling at your feet, ancient as the silent stones beneath the dunes. Behind you, the village sighed softly, in exhalation of prayer and waiting that folded the present into the past and the uncertain future. You could feel that fragile connection pulsing beneath the stillness, the slow, deliberate turning of unseen wheels that bound life and death, power and surrender. The sun inched higher, casting thin slices of heat that caught the edges of your vision and stretched shadows long, like whispered promises. Your gaze flicked toward the dark line at the horizon, where heat shattered the distant dunes into trembling glass. There, the slow shifting of form caught your eye again. A shadow detaching itself from the glow, deliberate and measured, moving with the steady inevitability of knowing eyes. You did not blink, afraid to break the fragile thread of attention that tethered you to this moment, suspended between breath and silence. Your heart beat slow, each thud a fading echo beneath the vast expanse of desert sky. The whisper came once more, curling around the silent earth, like a spider's delicate silk, threading your senses taut. The name pulsed against your mind, at the edge of the sun's reach, neither advancing nor retreating. Poised like a breath, held between heartbeat and echo. The desert held its breath with you, the endless sands folding close, as if to shield a secret too vast to name. And then the silence broke, not with sound, but with the slow, inexorable pull of the unseen, drawing you forward into a space where light and shadow met, waiting patiently to reveal what only the dawn could not yet promise. You stood at the ridge's crest, the vast desert spreading beneath you like an ancient cracked scroll left open to the relentless sun. The air hung heavy, the heat rising in slow wavering waves that distorted the horizon. Each breath you drew was thick with the dry musk of sand and sun-baked earth, a scent that clung to your nostrils like a whispered secret carried on the wind. The rough fabric of your cloak rustled softly as the faintest breeze teased its frayed edges, threading coolness through the dry heat, a fragile reprieve before the day's full weight pressed down again. The shadow you had glimpsed lingered still, a slow, deliberate presence folded into the quivering distance. It held there, at the edge of vision, not threatening, but unbearable in its quiet insistence. Like a pulse in the silence, a slow heartbeat woven through the desert's stillness, your eyes traced its shape, indistinct and shifting, part dust, part mirage, refusing to be seized fully by your gaze. Time seemed stretched, measured in the wavering shimmer of heat rather than in seconds. Your bare feet, dusted with dry grit, shifted restlessly on the hot stone, the uneven ground a sharp contrast to the creeping calm you fought to hold. Behind you, The village slumbered beneath the low sun, its cracked rooftops glowing with pale gold light, fragile as hope itself. The distant call of a bell pulsed faint and lonely, folding softly over the muted chants that now ebbed between hollow walls and sun-baked streets. You could feel the collective breath of the villagers, held in a tension as brittle as the dry twigs crumbling beneath your fingertips, the unspoken prayers woven tight around the fragile threads of mourning. Your fingers brushed the rough edge of your cloak, the coarse thread biting gently into skin that still tingled from the night's shadows. The scent of burnt sage and dry roots clung stubbornly to the fabric, mingling with the sharp tang of earth and sweat that rose from the sun-warmed soil beneath your feet. Each inhale drew deeper into that mixture, grounding you as your gaze drifted slowly across the endless dunes, their rolling forms softened by the haze that blurred the line between land and sky with smoky strokes. A soft rustling stirred nearby, the anxious murmur of dried leaves caught in a hesitant breeze. It was a sound that barely rose above the whisper of distant voices, yet you felt it ripple through the stillness like a trembling thread pulled tight. Your heart slackened briefly before tightening again, the slow drumbeat echoing in your chest. The shadow shifted once more, an ebb in the desert air that seemed to draw every trembling grain of sand into secret movement. You dared not blink, fearing the fragile tether might snap, the unseen presence dissolve into dust and silence. Each slow step forward was a measured negotiation with the earth, the dry grit pressing against your soles like the reluctant weight of memory. The brittle soil cracked beneath your toes, sending faint clouds into the lazy swirl of morning light. Your breath slowed deliberately, the sharp dryness of air filling your lungs in, shallow, rhythmic pulls that matched the steady hum of distant chants. Somewhere beyond the village's boundaries, the lone dog stirred briefly, but silence claimed the sound before it could fully rise. You came to the lip of a small plateau, the earth dropping away into a jumble of stone and cracked clay, a landscape both harsh and unforgiving, yet filled with slow, whispered life. Dry grasses trembled in the breeze like embers flickering just before a dying fire, their brittle stems trembling with stories untold. You crouched low, tracing the whisper of wind along the edges of your cloak, tapping your fingers softly against the rough stone beneath you. The earth seemed to pulse beneath that touch, alive with patient memory and dangerous calm. As the sun climbed, the shadows long and fragile stretched wider, reaching like silent fingers between sand and stone. The desert breathed with a slow rhythm, a poids deep in your bones, as if the land itself exhaled secrets you could almost grasp. The shadow's name hovered on the edge of your mind again, delicate, distant, a syllable carried on parched wind, desperate yet elusive. With the faintest intake of breath, you rose, muscles aching in slow protest. dust trailed from your steps as you moved away from the plateau's edge, drawn inexorably toward the faint outline of a narrow path weaving through brittle grass and sun-cracked stone. The fabric of your cloak snagged briefly on a stub of dry brush, and for a moment the world held still, the soft scrape of thread against nature's bones as fragile as the fragile pulse of dawn, unraveling. Around you, the desert whispered low, a susurrus that tangled with the distant murmurs of villagers locked in timeless ritual. The heat thickened, wrapping the world in a slow, heavy the sun-bleached walls. Somewhere faintly, the bell tolled again, deep, hollow, and echoing, folding the morning tighter into itself. The weight of unseen eyes pressed gently against the back of your neck, subtle as a breath, but no less potent. And then, abruptly, the shifting air drew your gaze, a form emerging cautiously from the hazy horizon, slow and deliberate, shaped in dust and light. It moved with uncanny certainty, the edges blurring in the sun's wavering glare, neither fully shadow nor solid figure. The silent approach carved space between moments, folding time into a fragile pause charged with unspoken consequence. You stood rooted as the figure neared, the chill of anticipation crawling beneath your skin like the slow slide of cool stone. The sands whispered beneath a silent wind, the sun paling for a heartbeat as the desert held its breath alongside you. Your heart beat slow and steady, each thump a measured echo weaving through the stillness. Then just beyond the veil of shimmering heat, a voice broke the quiet. Soft, almost swallowed by the desert's sigh, it carried a name, ancient, unmistakable, and yet wrapped in layers of dust and shadow. The sound slipped into your bones, entwining with the dry air and trembling sands, threading the fragile morning with the weight of forgotten fate. And in that whispered name, the desert opened wide, silent, waiting, impossibly patient. The desert exhaled slowly, its breath woven from centuries of silence and sun. Standing there on the ridge, the heat now a gentle pulse rather than a relentless hammer, you felt the weight in your chest begin to ease. The shadow, that elusive flicker dancing just beyond the horizon, had finally settled into something less ominous, more a quiet presence than a threat. The name it whispered, of your mind, no longer a question, but an invitation. Around you the village stirred with the subtle stirring of a new day's promise. The cracked rooftops gleamed softly, bathed in the mellow light, and the faint smoke from burning herbs wove delicate patterns that dissolved into the spreading warmth. The simplest sounds, the shuffle of feet across dry earth, whispers exchanged with cautious relief, threaded through the air as a slow hymn to survival. You breathed deeply, the dry musk of earth and sage mingling with a calming stillness that settled around your shoulders like a protective cloak. The fragile ritual, once tinged with dread and desperate hope, had reached its quiet culmination. The paste of herbs, now dry and crumbly against your skin, felt less like a talisman and more like a marker of endurance, a symbol of the tenuous balance held between life and the unseen. The ancient incantations that had folded the morning into tension and mystery gradually faded, swallowed by the steady rise of the sun and the soft settling of dust. As you moved down from the ridge, feet steady against the stubborn earth, the villagers' faces came into clearer focus. No longer etched by sharp lines of fear, their expressions softened into something shy and unguarded, a tentative hope knitting the fractured shadows of past uncertainty. Eyes met yours with a quiet gratitude shared in the stillness before words could form. The whispered choice your soul had been held to now breathed peace into the village's heart, as if a delicate thread had been rewoven to bind the present with the forgotten past. The heat stretched lazily across the sands as you crossed the narrow paths that stitched together the clustered huts. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, lit by the gentle glow of morning sunbeams, shifting like golden whispers through empty spaces. The rough fabric of your cloak caught the light, worn, faded, and suddenly precious, as if embodying the silent story of all who had come before and those who might follow in time's patient turning. A soft wind rose, carrying the faintest whisper of that name once more, gentle as the brush of fingers against skin, lingering and fading into the vast stillness. It was neither command nor fear now, but a quiet benediction, a subtle recognition of a journey ended and a pathway begun. The desert held its breath with you, a friend finally released from shadows, watching as the fragile strands of day unfolded. You knelt beside the last dying embers of the fire, letting the warmth seep slowly into your skin. The stones encircling it glowed faintly, reminders of countless dawns survived and nights endured. For a moment, the world seemed to pulse in rhythm with your own heart, steady, full, and open. The scent of burnt herbs curled softly upward, trailing delicate ghosts of smoke that vanished into the clear air, as if carrying away the last traces of uncertainty. The village's silence felt no longer like waiting, but like presence, an embrace held in stillness. Nearby, a dog stirred, nudging the earth lightly before settling again, its gentle breaths threading a soft, steady beat into the morning's calm. Somewhere on the wind, a distant bell tolled once more, hollow, resonant, folding the quiet deeper into itself like a whispered lullaby. Your gaze traced the horizon, where pale blues melted into soft ochres and the dunes rippled under the tender gaze of the sun. The vastness stretched endlessly, open and patient, a silent promise for tomorrows yet unwritten. Dust motes floated lazily through the sunbeams, their delicate dance of its coarse thread grounding you in this new clarity. The slow warmth of the sun softened the edges of memory and fear, weaving threads of quiet strength beneath the surface of your breath. The promise of a day no longer haunted by shadows, but held gently in the light, settled deep within. As you rose, the weight that had pressed upon your chest lessened. No sudden relief, no abrupt change, but the gentle unfolding of peace. The ritual's power had not vanished, it had transformed. An ancient song now sung softly beneath the desert's endless sky. And where once only silence had waited, there was now a subtle pulse, a rhythm worn by time, steady as the slow turning of earth beneath sun and stars. You step forward slowly, each footfall a careful echo on the cracked ground. The village lay still, its people woven into the fabric of this quiet dawn, hearts tethered to enduring hope. The crackling life of the desert whispered secrets old as time, carried on the warm wind that brushed your skin like a lingering touch. Behind you, the chamber where so much had trembled in shadow stood empty now, its ancient walls holding the echoes of whispered names and the fading traces of a fragile rite completed. Ahead, the path stretched outward, open, uncertain, but bright with the fragile light of possibility. And as the sun climbed steadily, the world breathed deeply. Dust scattered lightly over the earth, twirling upward in golden spirals before falling again, as delicate and certain as sleep itself. Your eyes closed softly, the warmth of the morning folding around you like a quiet benediction. In the stillness, the desert